The ballroom shimmered under soft golden lights that reflected off crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Waiters moved quietly between tables, carrying silver trays filled with sparkling drinks. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. Conversations blended into a low hum, rising now and then with laughter that felt carefully practiced. Most of the people in the room belonged there. Their suits were tailored perfectly. Their watches caught the light in a way that seemed intentional. They spoke in confident tones about investments, market shifts, and global connections. Cameras flashed from time to time near the stage where the main speaker of the night was expected to appear. At a table near the back of the hall sat a man and his young daughter. He did not look uncomfortable, but he did not look fully relaxed either. His suit was clean and pressed, though not as expensive as the others. His shoes were polished but worn at the edges. He kept one hand resting lightly on the back of his daughter's chair, almost without thinking. The little girl sat very straight, her small hands wrapped carefully around a tall glass filled with sparkling juice. Tiny bubbles rose to the top and popped softly. She watched the room with wide eyes, taking everything in, the bright lights, the loud voices, the shining stage. "Are we staying long?" she whispered. He leaned closer to her. "Not too long. We'll listen, clap, and then we'll go home." She nodded. She trusted him completely. He had not planned to bring her, but the invitation had come late, and there had been no one to watch her. Besides, he wanted her to see moments like this. He wanted her to understand that big rooms and powerful people were not something to fear. Still, he could feel the looks. A few guests glanced at their table and then quickly looked away. Some stared a little longer. A child did not fit into this kind of event. Neither did a man who looked like he had built everything with his own hands instead of inheriting it. He ignored the whispers. He had learned to ignore worse. On the stage, the host finally announced the arrival of the billionaire everyone had been waiting for. Applause filled the hall as a tall figure stepped into the spotlight. He moved with the ease of someone who was used to commanding attention. His voice carried smoothly through the microphone, confident and strong. He began speaking about growth, power, and vision, about taking risks and winning big. The crowd listened closely, nodding at the right moments. Some people laughed loudly at his jokes, even the ones that were not very funny. The single father listened too, not with admiration, but with interest. He had built his small company from a single laptop at his kitchen table. He knew about risk. He knew about staying awake at night, wondering if he could pay bills on time. His kind of risk did not come with applause. His daughter shifted slightly in her chair. The noise in the room had grown louder as the billionaire's speech became more animated. At one point, the billionaire stepped down from the stage and began walking between tables while still speaking. Cameras followed him. Guests leaned forward, hoping to exchange a word or shake his hand. He stopped near the table where the father and daughter were sitting. The billionaire continued speaking, using large gestures with his hands as he made a point about bold decisions. As he turned slightly, his arm moved across the table space. His hand brushed dangerously close to the little girl's glass. The glass tilted. It did not fall, but it shifted enough of the sparkling juice to ripple toward the edge. The father's hand moved instantly, steadying the glass before it could spill. His other hand remained on the back of his daughter's chair. Then he spoke. "Don't touch your glass." His voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was calm, steady, and cold in a way that made it impossible to ignore. The billionaire froze mid-sentence. The microphone picked up the silence before anyone understood what had happened. Conversations nearby stopped. A few heads turned quickly toward their table. The father did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at the billionaire with steady eyes. For a brief moment, time felt suspended. No one spoke to the billionaire like that. He was used to people apologizing, laughing nervously, or stepping aside quickly. He was used to being the center of control. The daughter looked up at her father, sensing the tension. His hand squeezed the back of her chair gently, reassuring her without words. The billionaire slowly lowered his hand. "I wasn't going to," he said, his tone measured. The father nodded once. "Good." A sharp breath escaped from someone at a nearby table. The air felt heavy. The billionaire studied the man in front of him. He noticed the simple suit, the worn shoes, the protective way he sat slightly angled toward his child. There was no fear in his expression, no attempt to impress, just quiet certainty. The billionaire gave a short smile, though it did not fully reach his eyes. "We're celebrating big opportunities tonight," he said, shifting his tone back toward the audience. No need for tension. A few people laughed softly, relieved that the moment might pass. But something had changed. The father adjusted the glass, so it stood firmly in the center of the table, away from the edge. He looked down at his daughter. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. "It almost fell." "It didn't," he said. The billionaire continued speaking, but his rhythm was slightly different now. He returned to the stage after a few more remarks, though his eyes flicked back once toward the table in the rear. At that table, the father felt the weight of stares again. But this time they were different. Some curious, some critical, some impressed. One man leaned over from the next table. "That was bold," he whispered. The father shrugged lightly. "It's just a glass." But to him, it was not just a glass. It was his daughter's. The little girl took a careful sip, holding the glass with both hands now. She leaned closer to her father. "Are we in trouble?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "No, we're fine." He kept his voice steady for her sake, but inside, he knew the night would not pass so easily. Across the room, the billionaire resumed his speech about dominance and control in business. But his mind wandered for a second. The words, "Don't touch your glass," replayed in his head. It was not the command itself that lingered. It was the reason behind it. Back at the table, the father thought about the many nights he had stayed awake when his daughter had been sick years ago, about hospital chairs and quiet prayers, about promising himself that no matter how hard life became, he would protect her from anything he could. He did not care how powerful a man was. He did not care about cameras or applause. Some things were simple. His daughter reached for his hand under the table. He held it without looking down. On stage, the billionaire paused briefly, as if losing his place, then continued. The audience listened, but the earlier smooth flow of the evening had cracked slightly. And in that small crack, something important had begun. The silence from earlier did not disappear completely. Even after the speech continued and the clapping returned, something stayed in the air. People pretended to focus on the stage, but many of them were still thinking about what had happened at the back table. The single father could feel it. He sat calmly, but inside his thoughts were moving fast. He replayed the moment again and again, the hand coming too close, the glass tilting, his daughter's small fingers tightening around it. He had reacted without thinking. It was not about pride. It was not about challenging a powerful man. It was instinct. His daughter leaned against his arm. The lights were bright, and the speech was long. She was trying to stay awake. "Can we go soon?" she whispered. "Soon," he said softly. He looked around the room again. This world was different from the one they came from. Here, people talked about numbers so large they did not feel real. They spoke about success like it was a game. But for him, every small step forward had come from sacrifice. Years ago, his life had looked very different. Back then, there had been laughter in their small apartment. There had been two voices making plans about the future. He had not imagined that one day he would be raising his daughter alone. The accident had happened suddenly. One ordinary evening that turned into something he could never undo. In a matter of hours, his world shifted. The hospital room, the quiet doctor, the heavy silence afterward. He remembered holding his daughter close that night. She had been too young to understand fully, but she knew something was wrong. She had asked when things would go back to normal. He had not known what to say. From that day on, everything he did had one purpose, to make sure she felt safe. He worked during the day at a small repair shop. At night, after putting her to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with an old laptop. That was where the idea for his small tech project was born. It started as a simple tool to help small local businesses manage their orders more easily. Nothing flashy, just useful. He taught himself coding through free online videos. He made mistakes. He fixed them. Some nights, he fell asleep at the table with the screen still glowing in front of him. There were times he wanted to quit. times when bills stacked up and doubt felt louder than hope. But every time he looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully, he reminded himself why he kept going. She had once gotten very sick at a crowded public event. Someone had handed her a drink by mistake. It had not been serious in the end, but the memory of her lying weak in a hospital bed stayed with him. He had promised himself then that he would never again ignore even the smallest risk when it came to her. That promise had spoken tonight. On stage, the billionaire wrapped up his speech to loud applause. Cameras flashed again. Music played softly as people stood to mingle. The father slowly rose from his seat. He adjusted his jacket and helped his daughter down from her chair. "Let's say thank you to the host, and then we'll leave," he told her. She nodded, holding his hand tightly. As they began walking toward the exit area, he noticed eyes following them. Some guests offered polite smiles. Others looked curious, as if trying to figure out who he was. A woman in a red dress stopped him briefly. "That was brave," she said carefully. He gave a small shrug. It wasn't meant to be brave. She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. Near the stage, the billionaire stood surrounded by investors and reporters. His expression was calm again, but his eyes were sharper now. He seemed to be scanning the room while listening to someone speak. For a brief second, his gaze met the father's. Neither looked away immediately. The father gave a short nod, not an apology, not in challenge, but simply as acknowledgement. The billionaire returned the nod, just as subtle. Then the crowd closed in around him again. Outside the ballroom, the hallway felt quieter. The noise from inside became muffled. The father let out a slow breath he had been holding. His daughter looked up at him. "Were you scared?" she asked. He smiled gently. "No, not even a little?" He thought about it. Maybe a little, but being scared doesn't mean you stay quiet. She seemed to think about that deeply. They stepped outside the hotel, into the cool night air. The city lights stretched in every direction. Expensive cars lined the entrance, engines humming softly. He did not own a car like those. He had parked his old vehicle a few blocks away, where parking was cheaper. As they walked, he felt both proud and uneasy. He knew the business world was small at that level. Word would spread quickly about what had happened. Would it hurt his chances? Would people see him as difficult, disrespectful? He looked down at his daughter walking beside him, swinging their joined hands lightly. If he had to choose again, he would say the same words. Back inside the ballroom, the billionaire finally stepped away from the crowd for a moment of quiet. He stood near a tall window overlooking the city. He replayed the scene in his mind. "Don't touch your glass." It had not been shouted. It had not been emotional. It had been controlled. He was used to people being impressed by him, or intimidated. But that man had shown neither reaction, only protection. The billionaire had built his empire from almost nothing too. He remembered sleeping in a tiny rented room in his early 20s, dreaming of success. He remembered promising himself he would never let anyone look down on him again. Somewhere along the way, success had become about proving something, about winning every room. Tonight, for a brief moment, he had not won, and strangely, he did not feel angry about it. He felt curious. An assistant approached him quietly. "Sir, your car is ready." "In a minute," he replied. He looked back toward the tables at the rear of the hall. The seat where the father and daughter had been sitting was now empty. Meanwhile, down the street, the father unlocked his old car and opened the passenger door for his daughter. She climbed in and buckled her seatbelt carefully. "Did you like the lights?" he asked as he started the engine. "They were pretty," she said, "but it was too loud." He chuckled softly. "I agree." As he drove through the city, he thought about how far they had come. His small company had finally started gaining attention. That invitation tonight had been proof of that. He did not want fame. He did not want to become someone different. He only wanted stability. A good school for his daughter. A home that felt safe. Time with her that no business deal could replace. At a red light, she suddenly spoke again. "I'm glad you were there." He glanced at her. "Where else would I be?" She smiled and leaned her head against the window. He realized something then. The world might measure success in money and influence, But the way she looked at him in that moment felt bigger than any applause in that ballroom. Across town, the billionaire's car moved smoothly through traffic. He sat in the back seat, quiet, watching the city pass by. He thought about his own children. They were older now, independent, distant. He tried to remember the last time he had attended one of their school events without checking his phone. The last time he had reacted purely out of protection instead of strategy. The image of the father steadying that glass returned to him. Such a small action, yet it had carried weight. By the time both cars disappeared into different parts of the city, the night had grown still. Two men from different worlds carried the same memory. One felt certain he had simply done what any parent would do. The other was beginning to question what he had been protecting all these years. And neither of them knew that the brief moment over a simple glass of sparkling juice was only the beginning. The next morning felt normal on the outside. The alarm rang at 6. The father reached over quietly to turn it off before it could ring a second time. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. For a few seconds, he forgot about the ballroom, the lights, and the silence that had followed his words. Then it all came back. He turned his head toward the small bed across the room. His daughter was still asleep, her hair spread across the pillow, one arm hanging loosely over the side. The sight of her breathing peacefully grounded him. He got up, made breakfast, and prepared her school lunch like he did every weekday. Toast, eggs, a small note folded carefully and placed inside her lunchbox. He never missed that part. When she walked into the kitchen rubbing her eyes, she smiled as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. "Are you famous now?" she asked suddenly. He almost laughed. "Why would I be? You talked to the man on stage." He poured her a glass of milk. "That doesn't make someone famous." She seemed satisfied with that answer. After dropping her at school, he drove to a small office space. It was on the second floor of an old building. The elevator did not always work, so he usually took the stairs. His company had only 5 employees. The office had mismatched chairs and simple desks. A whiteboard covered one wall, filled with ideas and half-erased plans. As soon as he stepped inside, he sensed something different. 2 of his team members were whispering near the coffee machine. When they saw him, they straightened up quickly. "What?" he asked, placing his bag down. One of them held up a phone. "You might want to see this." On the screen was a short video clip. Someone at the event had recorded the moment. The camera angle was slightly shaky, but the words were clear. "Don't touch your glass." The clip ended right after the silence. It had already been shared across several business pages. Comments were pouring in. Some people called him disrespectful. Some called him brave. Some said he had embarrassed himself. Others said he had shown real character. He felt his stomach tighten. He had not thought about cameras. He had not meant for the moment to become public. "Is this bad?" one of his employees asked quietly. He took a deep breath. "It's just noise," he said. "Let's focus on work." But it was not just noise. By noon, his inbox had filled with emails. Some were supportive messages from strangers. Others were curious investors asking about his company. A few were critical, questioning his professionalism. He read each one slowly. He did not regret what he had said. Still, he understood the business world. Image mattered. Around the same time, in a glass office high above the city, the billionaire was also watching the same clip. He had received it from 3 different people before breakfast. His assistant stood nearby, waiting for instructions. "Should we release a statement?" she asked. He replayed the video again instead of answering. He watched his own reaction carefully. The pause, the way he had lowered his hand, the look on his face. Then he focused on the father. There was no shaking in his voice, no anger, no attempt to gain attention, just protection, no statement. The billionaire finally said, "But sir, people are debating online." He nodded. "Let them." He leaned back in his chair, thinking. In his world, most confrontations were calculated. Every word carried strategy. Every action had a purpose. But that moment had not been strategic. It had been personal. Later that afternoon, the father received an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar. He hesitated before answering. "Hello," a calm voice responded. This is the office of the speaker from last night's event. He would like to invite you for a private meeting." There was a brief pause. The father's mind raced. "About what?" he asked. He didn't specify, only that he would appreciate your time. The meeting was scheduled for the next day. After hanging up, he sat quietly at his desk. His employees watched him carefully. "Well," one of them asked. "I've been invited to talk," he said simply. "Are you going?" He looked at the whiteboard filled with plans for expansion, plans that required funding and partnerships. "Yes," he said. That evening, as he picked up his daughter from school, she ran toward him with her usual excitement. "Guess what?" she said. "My teacher saw the video." His heart skipped. "What did she say?" "She said you must really care about me." He swallowed quietly. "And what did you say?" She smiled proudly. "I said of course he does." On the drive home, he told her about the meeting. "Are you in trouble?" she asked again. "No," he said. "Sometimes adults just talk things out." She thought about that. "Will you still say the same thing if someone touches my glass again?" He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Yes." The next day, he stood inside one of the tallest buildings in the city. The lobby was wide and quiet. Everything felt polished. Even the air seemed different. He wore the same suit from the event. It was the best one he owned. When he was led into the office, he saw large windows stretching from floor to ceiling. The view overlooked the entire city. The billionaire stood near the window, hands behind his back. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the billionaire turned. "You didn't hesitate," he said. The father understood immediately what he meant. "I didn't need to," he replied. There was no anger in the room, only curiosity. Most people in that hall would have apologized. The billionaire continued, even if they felt justified. "I wasn't trying to challenge you," the father said calmly. "I was protecting my daughter." The billionaire nodded slowly. "I know." That answer surprised him. They sat down across from each other. The billionaire asked about his company, about how it started, about the long nights and small beginnings. The father answered honestly. He did not exaggerate his success. He did not hide his struggles. At one point, the billionaire asked, "If I had reacted differently last night, would you have backed down?" The father thought carefully before answering. "No," he said. The room grew quiet again. Instead of irritation, something like respect passed between them. Power had met principle, and neither had broken. The billionaire leaned forward slightly. "You know that moment is being discussed everywhere." "I've seen," the father replied. "Does it worry you?" He considered the question. "It would worry me more if I had stayed silent." The billionaire gave a faint smile. For years, he had built his empire by dominating rooms, by being the loudest voice, by making others adjust around him. But here sat a man who had adjusted nothing, not out of ego, out of love, outside the office windows. The city continued moving, unaware of the quiet shift happening inside that room. Two men from different worlds sat across from each other, realizing that strength could look very different than they once believed. And somewhere in a small school classroom, a little girl colored a picture, completely unaware that her simple glass of sparkling juice had started something much bigger than either of them expected. The meeting did not end quickly. After their first exchange, the room settled into a different kind of silence. It was no longer tense. It felt thoughtful. The billionaire stood up and walked back toward the window. From that height, the city looked small and organized. Cars moved like tiny dots. People below were invisible. "When I was young," he began slowly, "I used to think that once I reached the top of a building like this, everything would feel clear." The father listened without interrupting. "But the higher I went," the billionaire continued, "the more complicated things became. More meetings, more deals, more expectations. Somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing small things." He turned slightly, like a glass on a table. The father understood what he meant. "I didn't mean to disrespect you," the billionaire said. "My gestures are big. I move fast. I don't always look at what's right in front of me." "It happens," the father replied calmly. "But you noticed," the billionaire said, "and you reacted without fear." The father leaned back in his chair. "It wasn't about fear. It was about responsibility. That word seemed to stay in the air for a moment. Responsibility. The billionaire walked back to his desk and sat down. His voice changed slightly, becoming less formal. "I have children," he said. "They're older now. We don't talk much." He did not look embarrassed saying it, but there was something heavy in his tone. "I provided everything," he continued. "The best schools, the best homes, the best opportunities. But I was always working, always building." He paused. "And when they needed something small, I wasn't always there to notice." The father felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he did not see a billionaire sitting across from him. He saw a man thinking about his own mistakes. "Children don't remember expensive things," the father said gently. "They remember moments." The billionaire looked at him carefully. "You sound very sure of that." "I am." He thought about hospital chairs, bedtime stories, school performances, and quiet dinners at home. None of those required wealth, only presence. The billionaire leaned forward. "Tell me about your company." The father explained again how it started, how he built it from nothing, how he focused on helping small business owners manage orders without complicated systems. He spoke about long nights and trial and error learning. He did not try to impress. He did not oversell. The billionaire asked detailed questions, not surface-level ones. Real questions. For over an hour, they talked about growth, ethics, scaling carefully, and not losing purpose while expanding. At one point, the billionaire asked, "If you had access to more funding, what would you change first?" The father thought carefully before answering. "I wouldn't change the purpose," he said. "I would only improve the reach. I don't want to build something that forgets why it started." The billionaire nodded slowly. That answer mattered. In his own journey, he had started with a clear purpose too. Over time, competition and pride had shaped his decisions more than meaning. "You know," the billionaire said quietly, "most people who come into this office ask me for money." The father stayed silent. "You haven't." "I didn't come here for that," the father replied. "Then why did you come?" He answered honestly. "Because when someone invites me to talk, I believe in showing up." The billionaire gave a small smile. It was simple, direct, real. Outside the office, employees moved through hallways, unaware that something important was happening inside. It was not a billion-dollar deal. It was not a public announcement. It was two men redefining what strength meant to them. Finally, the billionaire stood up again. "I would like to offer you something," he said. The father's expression did not change. "It's not a buyout," the billionaire clarified. "And it's not charity. I don't think you would accept either." The father almost smiled. "A partnership," the billionaire continued. "Access to my network, mentorship, strategic support. You keep control of your company. I only ask that you build it the way you described, without losing its core." The father absorbed the offer slowly. This was not small. It could change everything for his team, for their future, for his daughter's education, for stability. But he did not answer immediately. "I need time to think," he said. "Of course," the billionaire replied. There was no pressure in his voice. As the father stood to leave, the billionaire added one more thing. "Last night," he said, "when you spoke, it reminded me of something I haven't felt in a long time." "What was that?" "Being corrected for the right reason." The father nodded once. When he left the building, the sunlight felt brighter than usual. He walked slowly down the steps, thinking. He did not feel like he had won anything. He felt like he had been understood. That evening at home, he sat at the kitchen table after dinner while his daughter colored beside him. "How was your meeting?" she asked. "It was good," he said. "Is the man still mad?" He smiled softly. No, he wasn't mad. She thought about that for a moment. "Did you tell him why you said it?" "Yes." "And?" He listened. She nodded as if that solved everything. Later that night, after she went to bed, he reviewed the partnership proposal that had been emailed to him. The terms were fair. Surprisingly fair. There were no hidden traps. No attempt to take control. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. This opportunity could lift his company years ahead. But more importantly, it fell aligned with his values. Across the city, The billionaire sat alone in his living room. The house was large and quiet. Too quiet. He picked up his phone and scrolled through old photos of his children when they were young. Birthday parties he had missed because of meetings. School plays he had watched through short video clips instead of attending in person. He set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. The moment at the glass had forced him to confront something he had avoided for years. Success had come at a cost. The next morning, he made 2 unexpected calls. One to his assistant, asking her to adjust his schedule for the week, and another to one of his children. The conversation was short, slightly awkward, but it was a start. Meanwhile, the father arrived at his office and gathered his small team. He explained the offer clearly, the benefits, the risks, the responsibility that would come with it. "What do you think?" one of them asked. He looked around at the people who had believed in him from the beginning. "I think," he said slowly, "that growth is good, but only if we stay who we are." They agreed. That afternoon, he sent his answer, yes, but with one condition added in writing, that the company's original mission would remain protected in all future decisions. When the billionaire read the response, he smiled. He respected that condition more than the acceptance itself. 2 different men had stepped into that ballroom days ago. One was known for power. The other was known by almost no one. Now, both were learning that real influence was not about controlling a room. It was about protecting what truly mattered. And all of it had started with a simple sentence spoken over a small glass on a crowded table. Months passed, but the sentence spoken that night never fully disappeared. At first, the attention online slowly faded. New stories replaced old ones. New debates took over people's screens. But in real life, the impact stayed. The partnership began quietly. There was no dramatic press conference, no loud announcement, just a signed agreement and a shared understanding. The father returned to his small office the day after everything became official. The same mismatched chairs were there, the same whiteboard covered in ideas. But the atmosphere felt different. There was hope in the room. With access to better resources and experienced advisors, the company started growing faster. They hired 2 more employees. They upgraded their equipment. They improved their software so small businesses could use it even more easily. But one thing never changed. Every decision still began with the same question. Does this help real people? The father kept his routine steady. He still woke up early, still packed school lunches, still wrote small notes and folded them carefully. Some mornings were busy with investor calls. Other mornings were quiet, but he never missed dropping his daughter at school. One afternoon, she ran out of the building with a wide smile. "We're doing a career day next week," she said excitedly. "Can you come and talk about your work?" He hesitated for a second. His calendar that day was full. But then he remembered the hospital chair years ago, the promise he had made to himself. "I'll be there," he said. He rearranged 2 meetings without hesitation. Meanwhile, across the city, the billionaire's schedule had also begun to change. He still ran multiple companies. He still led large meetings. But he started blocking time on his calendar for personal moments. At first, it felt strange, almost uncomfortable. He attended a family dinner one evening without checking his phone once. The silence between him and his children was awkward. They were not used to him being fully present. But slowly, conversation started to flow again. He realized something important. Building relationships required the same patience as building businesses. One evening, he sat alone in his office and thought back to the ballroom, to the glass, to the calm voice that had stopped in mid-sentence. He no longer saw it as an interruption. He saw it as a correction, and he was grateful for it. Back at the small company, progress continued. The father traveled occasionally now for business meetings, but he never stayed away longer than necessary. If a trip required an overnight stay, he made sure his daughter felt secure and informed. "Why do you work so much?" she once asked while sitting at the kitchen table. He thought carefully before answering. "I work so we can have choices," he said. "But I don't work more than I need to." She nodded slowly. "I like when you're home." "So do I," he replied. The career day arrived quickly. He stood in a small classroom filled with colorful drawings and tiny desks. The children looked at him with curiosity. "What do you do?" one of them asked. I help small shops use computers to make their work easier, he explained simply. Are you rich? Another child asked bluntly. He smiled. I'm rich in important things. The children laughed, not fully understanding, but enjoying his answer. His daughter watched him proudly from her seat. Later that week, the billionaire also attended an event. It was another large gathering, similar to the one where everything had started. Bright lights, expensive suits, confident voices. This time, when he walked between tables while speaking, his movements were slower, more aware. At one table near the front, he noticed a young child sitting beside a parent. He stopped speaking mid-sentence again, but not because someone had corrected him. He looked down and said politely, May I? The parent nodded. He carefully moved a glass slightly toward the center of the table so it would not fall. Then he continued his speech. The audience did not know why that small action mattered, but he did. A few weeks later, he invited the father and his daughter to another event, this time as honored guests. When they arrived, the atmosphere felt different from the first time. There were still cameras and conversations, but there was less tension. The billionaire greeted them personally at the entrance. He crouched slightly to speak to the little girl at eye level. Thank you for letting me share the room with you again, he said gently. She looked at her father before answering, then smiled shyly. During his speech that evening, he spoke about leadership, but not the kind that dominates, the kind that listens. He told the audience that strength is not proven by how loudly someone speaks, but by what they're willing to protect. He did not mention the glass directly. He did not need to. After the event, the father stood near the back of the hall again, just like the first night. But this time, he did not feel out of place. He felt steady. He looked down at his daughter, who was holding a small cup of juice again. Careful, he said lightly. She giggled. I know. He realized something in that moment. The world would always be full of big personalities and powerful voices. But sometimes, the quietest words carry the greatest weight. Months turned into a year. The company continued to grow responsibly. It never became flashy or overwhelming. It stayed focused on helping people. The father remained the same at his core. He attended school events. He kept promises. He chose presence over pride. The billionaire also changed in small but real ways. He began mentoring young entrepreneurs personally instead of only funding them. He asked more questions. He listened longer. One evening, the two men met for coffee without cameras or assistants. They talked about work, about life, about mistakes and lessons. At one point, the billionaire said quietly, that night could have gone very differently. The father nodded. Yes, you could have stayed silent. I couldn't, he replied. And I could have reacted with anger, the billionaire admitted. But you didn't. They both understood that the outcome had depended on more than one person. Respect had met respect. As they parted ways, the billionaire added one last thought. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For reminding me what matters. The father did not respond with a grand speech. He only smiled. That night, back at home, he tucked his daughter into bed. Tell me the story again, she said sleepily. What story? The one about the big room and the glass. He chuckled softly and sat beside her. It's a short story, he said. A man forgot to look. Another man reminded him. And then, she asked, and then they both learned something. She closed her eyes, satisfied. As he turned off the light, he stood for a moment in the doorway, watching her sleep. He did not think about viral videos or business headlines. He thought about that simple promise he had made years ago, to protect what mattered most. The world had noticed one sentence, but for him, it had never been about the world. It had always been about the small hand holding a glass and the quiet strength to say, when necessary, don't touch your glass.